Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we continue with Part 2, the Egyptian, Hindu, and Persian Mysteries, from Ancient Mysteries and Modern Masonry by Charles H. Vail. Lecture 2, the Egyptian, Hindu, and Persian Mysteries. Undoubtedly, the ceremonies of initiation were originally few, and all were intended to symbolize the progress of the human soul. They were the outward signs of an inward fact. Initiation, as we shall see in a subsequent lecture, was regeneration, a real spiritual new becoming or rebirth. The candidate himself became the things symbolized: Hermes, Buddha, Christ, etc. This state was the result of real initiation, an evolution of the human into the divine. In the course of time, this spiritual truth was neglected, and initiation no longer meant spiritual regeneration, and the rites no longer typified the various stages of the soul's progress: the mystic birth, death, and resurrection. The key to the spiritual science was forgotten, the master's word lost, and initiation consisted merely in imparting to the candidate the traditional knowledge of the symbols as handed down from time immemorial, and gradually the true meaning of the symbols disappeared, and even the symbols themselves were transformed into crude dogmas. The ceremonies of initiation. The ancient mysteries were divided into two stages: the probationary path and the advanced or path proper. In most schools, the probationary path was merely preliminary, but as some schools began with the preliminary and numbering the stages or divisions, one needs be on guard to avoid misunderstandings. Others, as in Greece, divided their mysteries into the lesser and the greater, beyond which there was the true mystery of the path. In other systems, the true and the greater mysteries were undoubtedly the same. The higher evolution belonged to the true or real mysteries to which all others led. A neophyte was compelled to be proficient along these lines before he was allowed to take the real initiation and enter upon the path proper, which will be considered in a subsequent lecture. There were outer forms and ceremonies which stood for and symbolized the true mysteries, but little was known of their inner nature except by those who experienced them. The ceremonies were undoubtedly altered in the course of time, but even in the days of the greatest deterioration, we find traces of the hidden wisdom in connection with the ancient symbols, some of which have survived and are to be found in modern masonry. The Egyptian Mysteries. The learned Greek Plutarch, himself an initiate into the Osireiaca, of which there was probably a Thiassos at Delphi, gives much valuable information regarding the mysteries of Egypt. Of course, he could only give hints, for, as he says in speaking of the priests, their philosophy, which for the most part was hidden in myths and words, logoi, containing dim reflections and transparencies of truth, as doubtless they themselves make indirectly plain by fitly setting sphinxes up before the temples, as though their reasoning about the gods possessed a wisdom wrapped in riddle. So great then was the care Egyptians took about the wisdom which concerned the mysteries of the gods. And the most wise of the Greeks also are witnesses: Solon, Thales, Plato, Eudoxus, Pythagoras, and as some say, Lycurgus as well, through coming to Egypt and associating with her priests, and brought back to the memory of his men their symbolic and mysterious art, containing their dogmas in dark sayings. When therefore thou hearest the myth sayings of the Egyptians concerning the gods, wanderings and dismemberings and many such passions, thou shouldst remember what has been said above, and think none of these things spoken as they really are in state and action. Plutarch, concerning the mysteries of Isis and Osiris, sections 9, 10, 11. This is true not only of the Egyptian myths, but of all others. Plutarch then sets forth the Osiris and Isis mystery myth. It begins with the birth of the gods: Osiris, the elder Horus, Typhon, Isis, etc. Osiris and Isis, being in love with each other, were united. They ruled over Egypt for many years, but finally the malicious Typhon, his evil brother, while filled with envy, sought his destruction. He devised a beautiful chest, and having it brought into the banquet hall, promised to give it to anyone whom it would exactly fit. Osiris stepped in and laid down, whereupon they who were present rushed up and put on the lid and fastened it down, and carried the chest to the river Nile, whence it was borne out on the flood to the sea. When Isis heard what had been done, she set forth in search of the chest, which meanwhile had been carried by the waves to the Byblos country, where the land wash brought it to rest in a certain heather bush or tamarisk tree, a species of acacia. This bush grew around, enfolded, and hid it entirely within itself. The king Malkander marveled at the greatness of the tree and cut it down, and made of it a prop in the form of a pillar for his roof. But Isis, having found trace of the chest and its disposition through Anubis and the dominion spirit of a voice, came also to Byblos, and sitting down by a fountainhead showed attention to the maids of the queen, dressing their hair with ambrosia, thus securing an invitation to the palace, where she became nurse of the queen's little child. Then, finding time ripe to reveal herself, the goddess claimed for her own the pillar of the roof, and taking it down, she cut the tree from around the coffin, and placing the chest in a boat, carried the body to her son Horus, who concealed it in a deep forest. But Typhon, while out hunting, came upon it, and recognizing the body as that of Osiris, tore it into 14 parts and scattered them abroad. Isis, hearing what had been done, sought to recover the parts, and succeeded in finding all but one, which had been cast into the river and eaten by the fishes. Horus then fought Typhon and overpowered him when it was proclaimed that Osiris had risen from the dead. This is merely an outline of the myth. It has a macrocosmic and microcosmic meaning. In the former sense, Osiris and Isis are cosmic or supercosmic beings, symbolized by the sun and moon, and the elder and younger Horus are the intelligible and sensible worlds. Microcosmically, the myth pertains to the mystery of initiation, the Horus, or Christ stage of manhood. In this latter aspect, it symbolizes the mystic life of the initiate. In regard to initiation, Plutarch says, "When the initiates of Isis at their death are adorned in these robes, it is a symbol that this reason Logos is with them, and with him and naught else they go there or walk there, that is in Hades. The death here mentioned is the mystic death unto sin. For it is not the growing beard and wearing cloak that makes philosophers clear, not clothing in linen and shaving oneself that makes initiates of Isis. But a true Isiac is one who, when he by law receives them, searches out by reason, Logos, the mysteries shown and done concerning these gods, and meditates upon the truth in them." This mystery rite is referred to by Epiphanius as solemnized in the temple of Isis, who is called the Virgin Mother, or World Virgin. In speaking of the Feast of Epiphany, which was a great day in Egypt connected with the birth of the Aeon, a phase of the birth of Horus, he says, "Indeed, the leaders of the idol cults, filled with wiles to deceive the idol worshippers who believe in them, in many places keep highest festival on this same night of Epiphany, the manifestation of light, so that they whose hopes are in error may not seek the truth." For instance, at Alexandria in the Koraon, as it is called, an immense temple, that is to say, the precinct of the Virgin. After they have kept all-night vigil with song and music, chanting to their idol, when the vigil is over at cockcrow, they descend with lights into an underground crypt and carry up a wooden image lying naked on a litter, with the seal of a cross made in gold on its forehead, and on either hand 2 similar seals, and on both knees 2 others, all 5 seals being similarly made in gold. And they carry around the image itself, circumambulating 7 times the innermost temple, to the accompaniment of pipes, tabors, and hymns, and with merrymaking they carry it down again underground. And if they are asked the meaning of this mystery, they answer and say, "Today at this hour the maiden Kor, that is the Virgin, gave birth to the Aeon." In the city of Petra also the same is done, and they sing the praises of the Virgin, and him who is born from her, Dousares, that is, alone begotten of the Lord. This also takes place in the city of Elusa on the same night, just as at Petra and at Alexandria. Epiphanius, as an outsider, could not be expected to understand the rites he describes, and as a narrow bigot he could not be expected to deal with them fairly. But the importance of the passage is the testimony it bears to the fact that one of the most widespread mystic festivals was connected with a rite of resurrection. You notice here the crowing of the cock, which is connected with the crucifixion of Jesus, and the cross marked on the forehead, hands and knees or feet of the image, or the one who has returned from the underworld, Hades. Epiphanius tells us that the mystic rite represents a macrocosmic mystery. Very true, but it also represents a microcosmic mystery. The mystic birth, death, and resurrection were familiar to all the schools and communities of ancient times, and the mystic, rising again from the dead, was an integral part of the universal mystic drama. The initiations of Egypt are described by C.W. Leadbeater, a well-known theosophical writer, as follows. The candidate was attired in a white robe, emblematic of the purity which was expected, and brought before a conclave of priest initiates in a sort of vault or cavern. He was first formally tested as to the development of the clairvoyant faculty which he had been previously instructed how to awaken, and for this purpose had to read an inscription up on a brazen shield, of which the blank side was presented to his physical vision. Later he was left alone to keep a kind of vigil. Certain mantrams or words of power had been taught him, which were supposed to be appropriate to control a certain class of entities. Other ceremonies of the Egyptian mysteries are of interest. At one stage of his advancement, the candidate laid himself upon a curiously hollowed wooden cross, and after certain ceremonies was entranced. His body was then carried down into the vaults underneath the temple or pyramid, while he himself descended into Hades, or the underworld. That is to say, in our modern nomenclature, he passed on to the astral plane. Here he had many experiences, part of his work being to preach to the spirits in prison, for he remained in that trance condition 3 days and 3 nights, which typified the 3 rounds and the intervals between them, during which man was going through the earlier part of his evolution and descending into matter. Then after 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, on the morning of the 4th day, he rose again from the dead. That is, his body was brought back from the vault and so placed that the rays of the rising sun fell upon his face, and he awoke. This symbolizes the awakening of man in the 4th round and the commencement of his ascent out of matter on the upward arc of evolution. Some glimpses of occultism, page 73. According to Peachman, the Egyptian mysteries had 3 grades, called mortals, intelligences, and creators of light. The mortals were probationary pupils, who were instructed in the doctrine, but who had not yet realized the inner vision. The intelligences were those who had attained the inner vision and had become men and received mind. The creators or sons of light were those who had become one with the light, had attained to true spiritual consciousness. These 3 stages are called by W. Marsham Adams initiation, illumination, and perfection. This state could be attained while yet in the body and included the after-death consciousness as a part of its content. The ancient temples of initiation in Egypt were models of the heavenly Jerusalem, a type of the world building, to use a Jewish Gnostic term. Adams describes the temple at Dendera thus: in the center of the temple is the hall of the altar, with entrances opening east and west, and beyond it lies the great hall of the temple, entitled the Hall of the Child in his Cradle, from whence access is obtained to the secret and sealed shrine entered once a year by the high priest on the night of midsummer. The Book of the Master, or the Egyptian Doctrine of the Light, born to the Virgin Mother Adams. There were also various other halls and chambers, such as Hall of the Golden Rays, Chamber of Gold, Chamber of Birth, Dwelling of the Golden One, Chamber of Flames, all having reference to the mysteries of light and a divine birth. The chief hall of the temple was the Hall of the Child in his cradle, and the chief representation on the planisphere is the Holy Mother with the divine child in her arms. The Hindu mysteries. The mysteries of India were celebrated in temples carved out of solid rock, and in pyramids and dark pagodas. The Temple of Elephanta is perhaps the most ancient in the world. It is 135 feet square and 18 feet high, supported by 4 massive pillars, and its walls are covered with statues and carved emblematical decorations. The temples of Salsette exceed in magnitude those of Elephanta, though they are excavated in rock, their external form being pyramidal. The interior has many galleries and secret caverns, and in the inmost recesses of the structure a cubical cister, a sepulchre where the candidate was laid during his entranced state. An account of the initiation is given by Dr. Oliver in his History of Initiations, which we herewith condense as follows. The mysteries were divided into 4 degrees. The candidate might perform his first probation at the early age of 8 years. This consisted of an investiture of the zena, or sacred cord, of 3 threads, corresponding to our cable tow. This investiture was attended with numerous ceremonies and ended with an extended lecture from the preceptor. After this, the candidate was clothed in a linen garment without seams and a cord put over his right ear, and he was placed under the care of a Brahmin as a spiritual guide to be instructed in the necessary qualifications for the second degree. He was subjected to many hardships and rigid penances, and was taught to preserve the purity of his body, to avoid external defilements, and to devote much time to study of the sacred books. At the age of 20, if he were found to have made suitable proficiency in the preceding degree, he was admitted on probation to the second. Here his austerities were doubled. At the conclusion of this probation, he was initiated into the privileges of the mysteries. Sanctified by the sign of the cross, which was marked on every part of the body, he was subjected to the probation of Pastos, which was denominated the door of Pattaya, or hell, the Tartarus of the Grecian mysteries. This was the mystical death. His perfection of the probationary period being attained, he was led at the dead of night to the cave which had been duly prepared for his reception. The interior of this cavern blazed with a light equal to the meridian sun. There sat in rich and costly robes the three chief hierophants stationed in the east, west, and south to represent the sacred triad, Brahma, Vishnu, and Siva, with the attendant mystagogues, clad in holy vestments, seated around. The well-known signal from the sacred bell summoned the aspirant into the center of the august assembly, when the ceremony commenced with an anthem and solemn invocation. The oath was then administered, after which the candidate was sprinkled with water and a mantra pronounced. He was then divested of his shoes, that the consecrated ground on which he stood might not be polluted, and was then made to circumambulate the temple 3 times, exclaiming each time on his arrival in the south, "I copy the example of the sun and follow his benevolent course." Here we have the origin of the preparation of the candidate, the circuits, etc., of modern Masonry. At the conclusion of the circuits, the candidate was placed in the care of a spiritual guide and directed to observe proper silence during the succeeding ceremonies. He was then passed through 7 ranges of dark and gloomy caverns. Amid the din of howls, shrieks, and dismal lamentations, a sudden explosion was heard which seemed to rend the mountains. Flashes of light streamed before his eyes, and then all was darkness and silence. Gradually he beheld shadows and phantoms of various shapes, some with many hands, arms, and legs, while others had none. The most terrible and frightful figures appeared, all typifying the generation of the gods and other sacred mysteries. The candidate then personified Vishnu and was made to perform his numerous avatars. In the 5th manifestation, he took 3 steps at right angles, from which we get the 3 steps, as in the master's degree, ending at right angles. All these experiences were designed to teach certain lessons and illustrate important truths, as the 7 caverns, for instance, bore an allusion to the 7-fold division of the invisible world, the 7 places of reward and punishment. After all these trials, the pealing conch was sounded, the folding doors were thrown open, and the candidate was conducted into paradise, which was a spacious apartment blazing with 1,000 brilliant lights, ornamented with statues and emblematical figures, decorated profusely with gems and jewels. With eyes riveted on the altar, he was taught to expect the descent of the deity in the bright pyramidal fire that blazed upon it. This gorgeous display filled the mind of the aspirant with admiration and lighted up the holy fervor of devotion in his heart. And now, being fully regenerated, a new name was given him, expressive of his recently attained purity, and he was introduced to the chief Brahmin in the midst of the august assembly, who received him as a brother and associate, invested him with a white robe and tiara, seated him in an elevated place, and solemnly delivered the signs, tokens, and lectures of the order. His forehead was marked with a cross. An inverted level or tau cross was inscribed on his breast. This was a badge of innocence and a symbol of eternal life. He was invested with the sacred sash or belt, and finally, he was entrusted with the sublime name which was known only to the initiated. The arch-Brahmin then entered on an explanation of the various emblems which were arranged around him, with the arcana of the hidden science enfolded under the holy gloom of the mysterious veil. An extensive system of symbolical instruction was also used in the Hindu mysteries, and their philosophy was veiled under the impervious shade of hieroglyphical symbols. and intended to lead them into a maze of error from which it was difficult to extract a single idea which bore any semblance to the original truth. These symbols were publicly displayed in their temples, bearing streams of light to the initiated, while to the profane, they were but an obscure mass of unintelligible darkness. Oliver's History of Initiations, Chapter 2. The Persian Mysteries. The Persian Mysteries, or the Mysteries of Mithras, are among the most important of antiquity. Even Pythagoras is said to have traveled from Greece to receive initiation at the hands of those Persian hierophants. The candidates were prepared for initiation by various lustrations and 40-degree days of probation, which ended by a 50 days fast. These trials were undergone in a subterranean cavern where the candidate was bound to perpetual silence. At the conclusion of his probation, he was guided into the hall of initiation and received on the point of a sword presented to his naked left breast. He was conducted into the inner chamber where he was purified by fire and water, and then conducted through the 7 stages of initiation. Dr. Oliver describes these stages as follows. From the precipice where he stood, he beheld a deep and dangerous vault into which a single false step might precipitate him down to the throne of dreadful necessity, which was an emblem of those infernal regions through which he was about to pass. Threading the circuitous mazes of the gloomy cavern, he was soon awakened from his trance of thought by seeing the sacred fire, at intervals, flash through its recesses to illuminate his path, sometimes bursting from beneath his feet, sometimes descending on his head in a broad sheet of white and shadowy flame. Amidst the admiration thus inspired, his terror was excited by the distant yelling of ravenous beasts, the roaring of lions, the howling of wolves, the fierce and threatening bark of dogs. Enveloped in blackest darkness, he was at a loss where to turn for safety, but was impelled rapidly forward by his attendant, who maintained an unbroken silence, towards the quarter from whence the appalling sounds proceeded, and at the sudden opening of a door he found himself in a den of wild beasts, dimly enlightened with a single lamp. His conductor exhorted him to courage, and he was immediately attacked amidst the most tremendous uproar by the initiated in the forms of lions, tigers, wolves, griffins, and other monstrous beasts. Fierce dogs appeared to rise from the earth, and with dreadful howlings endeavored to overwhelm the aspirant with alarm. And how bravely soever his courage might sustain him in this unequal conflict, he seldom escaped unhurt. Being hurried through this cavern into another, he was once more shrouded in darkness. A dead silence succeeded, and he was obliged to proceed with deliberate step, meditating on the danger he had just escaped, and smarting under the wounds he had received. His attention, however, was soon roused from these reflections, and directed to other dangers which appeared to threaten. An undefined rumbling noise was heard in a distant range of caverns, which became louder and louder as he advanced, until the pealing thunder seemed to rend the solid rocks and burst the caverns around him. And the vivid and continued flashes of lightning in streaming sheets of fire rendered visible the flitting shades of avenging genii, who, frowning displeasure, appeared to threaten with summary destruction these daring intruders into the privacy of their hallowed abodes. Scenes like these were multiplied with increasing horror until nature could no longer endure the trial, and when the aspirant was ready to sink under the effects of exhaustion and mental agony, he was conveyed into another apartment to recruit his strength. Here a vivid illumination was suddenly introduced, and his outraged feelings were soothed by the sound of melodious music and the flavor of grateful perfumes. Seated at rest in this apartment, his guide explained the elements of those invaluable secrets which were more fully developed when his initiation was complete. Having pronounced himself disposed to proceed through the remaining ceremonies, a signal was given by his conductor, and 3 priests immediately made their appearance, one of whom, after a long and solemn pause, cast a living serpent into his bosom as a token of regeneration. And a private door being opened, there issued forth such howlings and cries of lamentation and despair as struck him with new and indescribable emotions of terror. He turned his eyes with an involuntary motion to the place from whence these bewailings appeared to proceed, and beheld in every appalling form the torments of the wicked in Hades. Turning from this scene of woe, he was passed through some other dark caverns and passages until, having successfully threaded the labyrinth consisting of 6 spacious vaults connected by winding galleries, each opening with a narrow stone portal, the scene of some perilous adventure, and having, by the exercise of fortitude and perseverance, been triumphantly borne through this accumulated mass of difficulty and danger, the doors of the 7th vault, or cellum, were thrown open, and his darkness was changed into light. He was admitted into the spacious and lofty cavern already described, which was denominated the Sacred Grotto of Elysium. This consecrated place was brilliantly illuminated and sparkled with gold and precious stones. A splendid sun and starry system emitted their dazzling radiance and moved in order to the symphonies of heavenly music. Here sat the Archimagus in the east, elevated on a throne of burnished gold, crowned with a rich diadem decorated with myrtle boughs and habited in a flowing tunic of a bright cerulean tincture. Round him were arranged in solemn order the prasules and dispensers of the mysteries, forming altogether a reverend assembly which covered the awestruck aspirant with a profound feeling of veneration, and by an involuntary impulse frequently produced an act of worship. Here he was received with congratulations, and after having entered into the usual engagements for keeping secret the sacred rites of Mithras, the sacred words were entrusted to him, of which the ineffable tetractys, or name of God, was the chief. History of Initiation, Oliver, chapter 4. The candidate was then instructed in the secret science. The meaning of the emblems was explained, the incidents experienced converted to a moral purpose, and their significance made clear. Nothing was done without a purpose, and every experience illustrated some truth and fact in nature. What they were designed to set forth, we shall see in subsequent lectures. Suffice it here to say that the Mithra mystery was identical with the Christ mystery, the mystery of man's perfection and final apotheosis. The secret of regeneration, of being born anew or spiritually or from above, in brief, the divinizing of man, was the last word of the Mithra rites. All else is introductory or ancillary. This secret was the one secret of all the great mystery rites and mystery arts. Mysteries of Mithra Mead, p. 47. A ritual dealing with the mystery of apotheosis and used by the most advanced in the Mithraic esoteric circles has recently been discovered. It is a yoga rite, one far in advance of the lower grades of initiation. Initiation does not mean consummation, it is merely starting things going. The candidate, to make the initiation valid, must seal up the links, so to speak, and this Mithraic ritual has to do with the final stages of spiritual evolution. For complete exposition of this ritual, see A Mithraic Ritual by G.R.S. Mead. Besides the various rites of initiation already described, we find the same sacraments in the mysteries that in later years were administered in the Christian Church. Justin Martyr, 150 A.D., says that the evil demons in the mysteries of Mithras aped the Christian Eucharist, for there was an offering of bread and of a cup of water with certain explanatory sacred formulae. Justin Martyr, First Apology, Volume 2, Section 54, 62, 66, Second Apology, Section 13. Tertullian, 210 AD, in speaking of the Mithraic mysteries, says, "He too baptizes some, that is, his own believers and faithful followers. He promises the putting away of sins by a laver of his own. And if my memory still serves me, Mithra there, in the kingdom of Satan, sets his marks on the foreheads of his soldiers, celebrates also the oblation of bread, and introduces an image of a resurrection, and before a sword wreathes a crown." Prescription Against Heretics, chapter 40. Tertullian also explains the identities by resorting to the convenient theory of the devil aping the Christian forms. But this curious explanation will hardly find adherents today. It is difficult to accept the earlier as copies and the more recent as originals. We shall see later the origin and meaning of these similarities. Thus we find in the ancient Egyptian, Hindu, and Persian mysteries a system of religious culture and training that originated thousands of years ago and which through many centuries preserved and handed down the Master's word to those who had made sufficient progress and were thereby duly and truly prepared to receive it. These great institutions were the wonder of the world, hence it is not strange that they received the highest praise from all the great men of antiquity. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, Please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.